I stood there in the back of the crowded funeral home, watching my father deliver the eulogy for my grandfather, without ever mentioning my name, not once. Every other family member received a personal anecdote or heartfelt tribute, but I might as well have been invisible. When it was over, my father found me alone by the reception table. He leaned in close, his expensive cologne suffocating me as he whispered, "You get nothing, just like you deserve." His eyes were cold, victorious. I couldn't breathe as family members stared. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrington, watched our exchange from across the room, his expression unreadable. Little did any of us know what was coming. Growing up as Dana Patterson meant living in the shadow of my brothers Andrew and Scott. They were the golden boys following our father's path into finance while I was the perpetual disappointment. My earliest memories involved Dad critiquing everything from my grades to how I dressed. Nothing was ever good enough. "Finance is in our blood, Dana." He would lecture whenever I showed interest in anything else. "The Patterson name means something in this town." What that something was depended entirely on who you asked. To the country club set, Dad was a financial wizard who transformed my grandfather's modest investment firm into a powerhouse. To me, he was the man who missed every school play and tennis match because money doesn't make itself. When I announced my decision to study nursing instead of business, the temperature in our house dropped 20 degrees. Nursing Dad had scoffed over dinner. "That's what people do when they can't cut it in the real world." Mom just stared at her plate while Andrew and Scott exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I want to help people," I'd said. "We help people manage their money," Dad countered. "That's real help." From that moment, a wall rose between us that never came down. During college, I called home weekly, but Dad was always in a meeting. When I graduated with honors, he attended the ceremony but spent most of it on his phone. Then Grandpa Walter got sick. I learned about it from Mom, not Dad. Congestive heart failure at 78. The prognosis wasn't terminal, but he needed care and monitoring. Dad hired a nurse for weekdays but complained constantly about the cost. "It's highway robbery," he told me during one of our rare phone conversations. "But your grandfather refuses to consider assisted living." I was finishing my nursing residency in Chicago when I called Grandpa directly for the first time in months. "Dana girl." His voice was weaker than I remembered, but still warm. "What a wonderful surprise. How are you really doing, Grandpa?" A pause. "Well, I've been better. This heart of mine isn't what it used to be." "Is the nurse helping?" Another pause. "She's efficient. Not much for conversation, though." "Your father found the cheapest option, I suspect." That weekend, I flew home to Pittsburgh and was shocked by what I found. Grandpa's beautiful colonial home, once immaculate, had a neglected air. Inside, he sat in a worn armchair looking smaller than I remembered. "The mighty nurse arrives," he teased, eyes brightening when I entered. I spent the weekend cleaning, cooking, and simply sitting with him. We talked more in those 2 days than we had in years. He showed me old photographs and told stories about Dad as a boy that seemed impossible given the cold man I knew. "Your father wasn't always so rigid," Grandpa said. "The business changed him." By Sunday night, I'd made my decision. I accepted a position at Pittsburgh General and rented an apartment 15 minutes from Grandpa's house. Dad was furious. "You're throwing away a job offer from Northwestern for this," he demanded, when I told him. "For what?" "To play nurse to an old man who'll probably be gone in a year." "That old man is your father," I reminded him. "And that's why I hired professional care. You're making an emotional decision that will derail your career." But I stayed. For the next 2 years, I worked hospital shifts and spent my free time with Grandpa. I drove him to appointments, organized his medications, and made sure he ate properly. On good days, we sat in his garden and talked for hours. On bad days, I held his hand while he struggled to breathe. My brothers visited occasionally, usually for 15 minutes, on their way to or from somewhere more important. Dad came only when absolutely necessary, always checking his watch and taking calls during his visits. "Don't judge them too harshly," Grandpa told me once. "Some men don't know how to face mortality. It frightens them." "Does it frighten you?" I asked. He smiled gently. Not as much as it would have if you hadn't come home, Dana girl. As months passed, Grandpa shared more about the family business Patterson Financial Services. He'd started it with nothing but determination and a small loan building it client by client. The business was never supposed to be the point, he confided one evening as we watched the sunset from his porch. It was just a means to care for the family and help others secure their futures. Somewhere along the way, your father forgot that. Why did you let him take over completely? I asked. Grandpa sighed. I thought I could step back without stepping away. By the time I realized my mistake, the company culture had changed. Now it's all about the bottom line, not the people we serve. One rainy Tuesday, while organizing Grandpa's desk, I found a letter from his doctor, addressed to my father. It was dated 6 months earlier and mentioned concerns about cognitive decline. Attached was paperwork for competency evaluation that had never been completed. When I asked Grandpa about it, his expression darkened. Your father's been trying to have me declared incompetent for months, he said quietly. He wants control of my personal assets before I die. That's horrible, I gasped. Have you confronted him? No need. I changed my will after the first attempt. Mr. Harrington has everything in order. What does that mean? Grandpa just patted my hand. It means I've had time to think about what truly matters, Dana girl. And who? 2 weeks later, Grandpa's heart finally gave out. I was with him, holding his hand, telling him about my day at the hospital. One moment he was smiling at my story. The next he was gone, slipping away so peacefully, I didn't immediately realize what had happened. Dad took control of the funeral arrangements, immediately excluding me from all decisions. And now here we were at the service, where my name wasn't even mentioned, despite being the only family member who'd truly been there for Grandpa in his final years. The day after the funeral, I returned to my apartment to find an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, just my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a note written on pale blue stationery. Dana, I need to speak with you privately. It's about Walter. Please come to the house tomorrow at 2. Use the side entrance. June. June Miller had been Grandpa's housekeeper for over 20 years. I'd gotten to know her well during my time caring for him, though she was a quiet woman who kept to herself. This was uncharacteristically mysterious. The next day, I parked a block away from Grandpa's house, feeling strangely like a trespasser. June opened the side door, before I could knock, ushering me inside, with nervous glances toward the street. Thank you for coming, she said, leading me to the kitchen. I wasn't sure if you would. What's going on, June? She placed a leather-bound journal on the table. Your grandfather asked me to give you this after he was gone. He made me promise. I opened the journal to find meticulous entries in June's handwriting dating back 2 years. Each entry documented my visits to Grandpa, the duration, what we did, conversations we had, medications I managed. He asked me to keep a record, June explained. Every visit, every call, everything you did for him. Said someday it might matter. Why would he need this documented, I asked, flipping through pages of my own life. Protection, I think. June lowered her voice. Your father's been doing things with the company. Things Mr. Walter didn't approve of. What things? I overheard arguments. Your father wanted to access investment accounts in Mr. Walter's name. When your grandfather refused, the visits from lawyers started. June revealed that my father had brought different attorneys to the house trying to get Grandpa to sign papers he didn't understand. After Grandpa refused, Dad began the campaign to have him declared incompetent. That's when Mr. Walter called his old friend Mr. Harrington. They spent hours in the study together. After that, your father couldn't access anything without proper authorization. June also mentioned that Dad had been pressuring Mr. Harrington to expedite the will reading scheduled for the following week. He's been calling daily, demanding it happen sooner. Mr. Harrington won't budge on the date. Before leaving, I asked if I could see Grandpa's study one last time. June hesitated before handing me a key. Mr. Walter said you might ask. He said to tell you to look behind his edition of Moby Dick. In the study, I found the weathered copy of Melville's classic on the shelf. Behind it was a small brass key taped to the wall. It fit a locked drawer in Grandpa's desk, revealing a wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were photographs I'd never seen Grandpa and Dad in happier times, fishing trips, and ball games. Beneath these were bundles of letters tied with twine. Many were between Grandpa and various business associates dating back decades. As I read through them, a troubling picture emerged. 15 years ago, Grandpa and Dad had a major disagreement over business practices. Dad wanted to expand into high-risk investments, while Grandpa insisted on maintaining their conservative approach, focused on retirement planning for middle-class clients. What began as a philosophical difference escalated into an ethical one, with Dad eventually taking actions without Grandpa's approval. One letter from a former employee alleged that Dad had misrepresented investment returns to clients. Another from Grandpa to Dad expressed deep disappointment and warned of irreparable damage to the firm's reputation if things continued. At the bottom of the box was a USB drive, with a note attached in Grandpa's handwriting, for Dana's eyes only. I took it home and plugged it into my laptop. Grandpa's face filled the screen recorded several months before his death. He looked tired, but determined. "Dana, girl," he began. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and things have probably gotten ugly. Your father will fight for everything, not because he needs it, but because he thinks he's entitled to it. He believes he built the company alone, forgetting the foundation I laid and the principles that made it successful." Grandpa explained that he'd been gathering evidence of questionable financial dealings. Dad had been using company resources for personal investments, misdirecting funds, and potentially violating financial regulations. "I don't want to ruin your father, but I can't reward his behavior," Grandpa continued. "He'll try to erase you from your inheritance because he knows you're the only one who might challenge how he runs things. Be prepared, Dana. The reading of the will won't go as he expects." The video ended with Grandpa looking directly into the camera. "Remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in how you treat people when it costs you something. You're richer than your father will ever be." I sat in stunned silence after the video ended. I'd known Dad was difficult, and that he and Grandpa had different views on business, but I never imagined the situation was this serious. What was I supposed to do with this information? Before I could decide, my phone rang. It was Mr. Harrington. "Dana, I've been trying to reach you. The will reading has been moved up to tomorrow at 1. Your father insisted, and I couldn't delay any longer without a legal reason. Tomorrow." My mind raced. "Is that normal?" "Nothing about this situation is normal," Mr. Harrington replied cryptically. "Just be prepared." The offices of Harrington Law were located in a historic building downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed simply in a black skirt and blouse, only to find the rest of the family already assembled in the conference room. My brothers and their wives were in designer morning attire that looked more appropriate for a fashion show than a will reading. Dad sat at the head of the table in a power suit. Holding court like this was a board meeting. "Finally decided to show up," Dad remarked as I entered. "We were about to start without you. The reading isn't scheduled until 1," I replied, taking the only remaining seat at the far end of the table. "Some of us have real jobs to get back to." "My brother, Andrew," said, checking his Rolex. Dad was already discussing how he'd reorganize the company once he officially took control. "The commercial property division needs modernization. Walter was too sentimental about those old buildings downtown." "Will we be liquidating the vacation property in the Poconos?" Scott asked. "Probably. It's just gathering dust," Dad replied, though Grandpa had loved that cabin and spent every summer there until his health declined. Mr. Harrington entered precisely at 1, carrying a leather portfolio and looking unusually solemn. His assistant followed with a laptop and projector. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began formally. "We're gathered for the reading of Walter Patterson's last will and testament. Before we begin, I must state that Walter was of sound mind when this will was executed and underwent an independent psychological evaluation to confirm his competency." Dad shifted uncomfortably at this pointed remark. "Why would his competency be in question?" my sister-in-law Tiffany asked, looking confused. Mr. Harrington ignored the question and proceeded with the formalities. The initial provisions were standard donations to Grandpa's church and favorite charities. Then came personal bequests. My brothers received family heirlooms. Scott got Grandpa's watch collection, Andrew the vintage car Grandpa had restored. Their wives received jewelry that had belonged to Grandma. Throughout this, my name wasn't mentioned. Dad kept glancing at me with a smug expression that made my stomach knot. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to maintain composure. Now, regarding Patterson Financial Services, Mr. Harrington continued. As you know, this represents the bulk of Walter's estate, with current valuation exceeding $30 million. The room grew tense with anticipation. Dad leaned forward slightly. Before I announced the disposition of these assets, Mr. Harrington said Walter requested that a video message be played. Is that necessary? Dad interrupted. We all know Walter intended the company to remain under family leadership, which has been my role for years. It was his explicit instruction that this message be viewed before proceeding. Mr. Harrington nodded to his assistant, who dimmed the lights and started the projector. Grandpa appeared on the wall screen, sitting in his study, looking stronger than he had in his final months. The recording was clearly made earlier than the one I'd seen. Hello, family, he began. I've never been one for dramatic gestures, but some things need to be said clearly and on the record. He looked directly into the camera. Richard. He addressed my father. You've spent years trying to push me aside, believing the company would be better without my outdated influence. You've taken liberties with company resources, made decisions that violated our founding principles, and recently attempted to have me declared incompetent to gain control of my personal assets. Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to my father, whose face had gone rigid. This is preposterous, Dad sputtered. He was confused in his final months. Grandpa continued as if anticipating the interruption. I've provided Mr. Harrington with documentation of these activities, including your attempt to divert $2 million of client funds into your personal offshore account. The room fell completely silent. For years, I've watched you value profit over people's status over substance. You've turned my life's work into something I no longer recognize, something I cannot entrust to someone with such questionable judgment. Grandpa's expression softened slightly. I still love you, son, but I do not trust you with my legacy. Not anymore. The video ended, leaving a stunned silence. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat and continued reading. To my son, Richard Patterson, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my sincere hope that he will reflect on the values that matter most in life. Dad's face turned crimson. This is a mistake. He was manipulated at the end. I'll contest this. I strongly advise against that, Mr. Harrington said calmly. The documentation Walter mentioned is quite thorough and would become public record in a contestation. What about us? Andrew demanded, gesturing to himself and Scott. We've been working for the company for years. Mr. Harrington turned a page. To my grandsons Andrew and Scott Patterson, I leave $500,000 each, with the condition that this money be held in trust for 5 years, during which time they must work outside the family business to gain perspective on how the majority of our clients live and work. My brothers looked as though they'd been slapped. The room had become unbearably tense. Everyone was looking anywhere but at my father, whose breathing had become audibly strained. And finally, Mr. Harrington said, turning to look directly at me, to my granddaughter, Dana Patterson, who alone remembered that wealth without compassion is meaningless, who sacrificed her own advancement to care for me when others were too busy, and who represents the values upon which Patterson Financial Services was founded. I leave controlling interest in the company, all remaining assets, and my eternal gratitude for showing me that the Patterson legacy is in capable hands. The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't process what I'd just heard. My father broke it with a strangled laugh. This is a joke. She knows nothing about finance. She's a nurse, for God's sake. Walter believed her understanding of human needs made her uniquely qualified to restore the company's original mission, Mr. Harrington replied. He also appointed an advisory board of his most trusted colleagues to assist during the transition. Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I won't stand for this. She manipulated him when he was vulnerable. This will is getting contested. Dad, I said quietly, finding my voice. Please don't do this. He turned on me with such venom that I flinched. You planned this all along, didn't you? Playing the devoted granddaughter while poisoning him against his own son. Well, enjoy your victory while it lasts. When I'm finished, you'll be lucky to keep your nursing job. He stormed out, followed quickly by my brothers and their wives, leaving me alone with Mr. Harrington. He means it, I said numbly. He'll fight this. Mr. Harrington sat beside me. Your grandfather anticipated that. There's more you need to know. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Dad moved with ruthless efficiency to undermine me before I could even understand what I'd inherited. He called an emergency board meeting, introducing a motion of no confidence before I could even attend. Only Mr. Harrington's legal intervention prevented an immediate vote. You have no experience, no qualifications, and no business running this company. Dad told me bluntly when I confronted him at his office. The board knows it. The employees know it. If you had any sense, you'd sign everything over to me and take a generous cash settlement. That's not what Grandpa wanted, I replied. Walter was a sentimental old man who lost touch with reality, he snapped. This company needs leadership, not some bleeding heart nurse with delusions of grandeur. Within days, rumors began circulating among the company's clients that Patterson Financial was undergoing destabilizing changes. Several major accounts requested transfers of their portfolios. Longtime employees were suddenly uncertain about their futures. Your father is orchestrating this, Mr. Harrington explained during one of our daily crisis meetings. He's telling people you plan to liquidate assets and completely restructure, creating uncertainty in the market. Meanwhile, my brothers had become Dad's most vocal supporters. During a particularly painful family dinner, my mother insisted upon they took turns explaining why I should do the right thing. You're being selfish, Andrew said. This affects all our families, not just you. Dad built this company, Scott added. Grandpa was basically retired for years. This whole thing is just spite. When I mentioned Grandpa's concerns about ethical violations, they both dismissed it as business complications an outsider wouldn't understand. The situation worsened when extended family began taking sides. Aunts, uncles, and cousins, who had barely acknowledged my existence, suddenly had strong opinions about my inheritance. Most avoided directly criticizing Dad but suggested I consider family harmony and find a compromise. The lowest point came when Dad escalated his campaign to the hospital where I worked. I never discovered exactly what he said, but suddenly my supervisor was questioning my commitment and suggesting I resolve my personal issues. Colleagues who had been friends began treating me with careful distance. Is everything okay, Dana? My supervisor asked during a performance review that had been moved up by 3 months. There are concerns about your focus lately. My grandfather died recently, I explained. There have been some complications with the estate. I've heard, she said carefully. Several board members are Patterson Financial clients. They've expressed concerns about having hospital staff involved in some kind of financial scandal. There's no scandal, I insisted. Just a family disagreement. Of course, she replied, not meeting my eyes. Still, perhaps you should consider a leave of absence until things settle down. That evening I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by legal documents I barely understood, feeling completely overwhelmed. I'd lost my grandfather, was being pushed out of my job, and my entire family had turned against me. For what a company I never wanted and didn't know how to run. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I should just walk away. I was contemplating exactly that when my phone rang. It was Andrew, which was surprising enough that I answered. Can we meet? He asked without preamble. Alone. Don't tell Dad or Scott. We met at a diner across town, far from family haunts. Andrew looked terrible, unshaven, and exhausted. You need to know something, he said after ordering coffee. Dad's not just fighting you out of pride. The company's in trouble. What do you mean? Andrew glanced around before continuing quietly. There's debt. A lot of it. Dad's been taking bigger and bigger risks the past few years, trying to generate the returns he promised clients. When investments didn't perform, he started moving money around to cover the shortfalls. That's illegal, I gasped. It's complicated, Andrew replied, defensive even now. He always intended to replace the funds once the market turned around. But then some real estate developments failed, and a hedge fund he was heavily invested in collapsed. How bad is it? Andrew's expression was grim. Bad enough that without Grandpa's personal assets to shore things up, there could be criminal investigations. That's why Dad's desperate. It's not just about the inheritance, it's about survival. Does Scott know? Parts of it. Dad's kept us compartmentalized. I handle certain accounts, Scott handles others. Nobody sees the whole picture except Dad. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Andrew stared into his coffee. Because I have kids, Dana. If this blows up, I could face charges too. I've done things I shouldn't have done because Dad assured me it was temporary and necessary. You need to come clean, I urged. You don't understand what you're asking. It's not just jail. It's disgrace. Our family name would be ruined. It already is if what you're saying is true. Andrew looked up suddenly angry. This is exactly why Grandpa should never have put you in charge. You don't understand how business works sometimes. I understand right and wrong, I countered. It's not that simple, he hissed. Just take Dad's settlement offer. Walk away. Let him fix this. By continuing to steal from clients, Andrew stood abruptly. I shouldn't have come. Forget we talked. After he left, I sat for a long time trying to process this new information. If Andrew was telling the truth, the situation was far worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about who controlled the company. It was about potential financial crimes that could send my father and brothers to prison. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I'd fallen into a depression, unlike anything I'd experienced before. I called in sick to work and spent the day staring at the walls, paralyzed by indecision. I hadn't asked for any of this. I just wanted to care for my grandfather in his final years. Now I was caught in a web of family betrayal and possible criminal activity. Was fighting for this inheritance worth destroying what remained of my family? Was I really prepared to see my father and brothers prosecuted? And even if I wanted to take control of the company, did I have the skills to save it from the mess they'd created? For the first time since Grandpa died, I cried until there were no tears left. After 3 days of near catatonic indecision, I received a text from Mr. Harrington. Walter believed in you for a reason. When you're ready to fight back, call this number. Below was a name, Eleanor Chambers, and a phone number. It took me another day to make the call. Eleanor turned out to be a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud. Harrington's told me the broad strokes, she said when we met at her office. But I'll need access to complete records to determine the extent of the problem. I don't even know if I can get those, I admitted. You're the majority shareholder, she reminded me. Legally, you can access everything. With Mr. Harrington's help, I formally asserted my rights as controlling owner and requested complete financial records. Dad fought this, of course, but his legal options were limited. While we waited for the documents, Eleanor gave me a crash course in corporate finance and the regulations governing investment firms. Your grandfather built a solid company, she explained. The fundamental structure is sound. The problems appear to have started about 7 years ago with increasingly aggressive investment strategies. When we finally received the records, Eleanor spent weeks analyzing them. What she found confirmed Andrew's warnings and revealed even worse issues. There's a pattern of misappropriation dating back at least 5 years, she reported. Client funds were diverted to high-risk investments, not disclosed in their portfolios. When those investments failed, money was moved from other accounts to cover the losses. Is it criminal? I asked quietly. Multiple securities violations, wire fraud, potentially money laundering through some offshore entities. Yes, it's criminal. The news should have devastated me, but instead I felt a strange clarity. The situation was terrible, but at least I understood it now. What are my options? Eleanor outlined several approaches, from negotiating a quiet restructuring to full disclosure to regulatory authorities. Each had significant consequences for the company and my family. Whatever you decide, she concluded, you need to act soon. Your father is likely destroying evidence and moving assets as we speak. That same week, June contacted me again. She'd been dismissed from Grandpa's house, now legally mine, but effectively controlled by my father, who'd simply moved in after the funeral. I've been talking to some people you should meet, she said. June introduced me to former Patterson Financial employees who'd left or been fired over the past 5 years. Their stories formed a pattern. Questioning Dad's practices led to marginalization and eventually termination, often with signed non-disclosure agreements. Your grandfather hired me right out of college, explained Thomas Miller, once the company's compliance officer. He believed in ethical business above all else. When your father started bending rules, I objected. 3 weeks later, I was escorted out of the building for performance issues. After 15 years of excellent reviews, Thomas connected me with other former employees with similar experiences. Gradually, a network formed, people with deep institutional knowledge of the company and loyalty to Grandpa's original vision. They provided insights into where to look for specific evidence and which clients might have been most affected. As this support system grew, my confidence returned. I was still a nurse, not a financier, but I understood people's systems and integrity values that seemed in short supply in the world my father had created. My newfound resolve was tested when Dad showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening. "This has gone far enough," he said, pushing past me into the living room. "You're destroying everything I've built." "You mean everything you've stolen?" I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. "Don't be dramatic. Business involves risk. Sometimes adjustments are necessary." "Fraud isn't an adjustment, Dad." His expression hardened. "You're in over your head, Dana. You have no idea the forces you're dealing with or the people you're angering. Walk away now with a generous settlement, or I promise you'll regret it." For the first time in my life, I stood my ground against him. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." "You should be," he said quietly. "This isn't just about money. Your career, your reputation, everything you care about can be taken away. People have long memories in this town. Is that a threat? It's reality. Ask yourself what Walter would really want. Would he want his granddaughter destroying her life on some misguided crusade? Would he want his son and grandsons imprisoned, the family name dragged through the mud?" "Grandpa wanted justice," I said. "And so do I." After Dad left shaken but undefeated, I received an unexpected call from George Fleming, Grandpa's original business partner who had retired 15 years earlier. He'd heard about the situation through the Pittsburgh financial community grapevine. "Your grandfather and I built that firm on a handshake and our good names," George told me when we met. "Sounds like Richard forgot the principles that made us successful in the first place." George offered strategic advice from his decades of experience and made introductions to key industry contacts who respected my grandfather. Most importantly, he helped me understand the company's original mission. "Patterson Financial wasn't built to make anyone rich," he explained. "It was built to help regular people secure their futures with honest advice and careful management. We measured success by our clients' well-being, not our profit margins." With George's guidance, I began formulating a plan to restore the company's ethical foundation while addressing the immediate financial crisis. The plan would require confronting my father directly with evidence too substantial to dismiss. As I gathered my team and prepared for this confrontation, Eleanor made a disturbing discovery. "Your father has been selling company assets without board approval," she reported. "Real estate holdings, investment positions, even client lists. The proceeds are being funneled through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. He's stripping the company before I can take control," I realized. "Precisely. And accelerating quickly. If we don't move now, there may not be much left to save." With this urgency in mind, I scheduled a family meeting at Grandpa's house. My house now, though I hadn't yet asserted ownership. I invited Dad, my brothers, and Mr. Harrington. It was time to end this shadow war and bring everything into the light. Grandpa's house felt different as I walked through the front door for the confrontation. Family photos still lined the walls, but the soul of the place had changed. Dad had moved in his modernist furniture, replacing Grandpa's comfortable pieces. The scent of Grandpa's pipe tobacco had been overwhelmed by chemical air fresheners. Dad and my brothers were already seated in the living room, presenting a united front. Mr. Harrington arrived precisely on time, nodding reassuringly to me as he took a seat slightly apart from the family cluster. "I appreciate you all coming," I began. "Let's cut to the chase," Dad interrupted. "Harrington says you've called this meeting to discuss a settlement. I'm prepared to offer you $2 million to walk away completely. No ownership, no involvement, No further contact with the company or its clients. That's very generous considering your limited qualifications, Scott added. I took a deep breath. I didn't come to discuss a settlement. I came to address the fraud you've been committing. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Be very careful about making accusations you can't support, Dad warned. Oh, I can support them. I opened a folder and began outlining what Eleanor had discovered: the misappropriated funds, the false statements to clients, the offshore accounts, the unauthorized asset sales. As I spoke, I placed document after document on the coffee table between us. Dad's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. My brothers exchanged uneasy glances. These are complex financial maneuvers taken out of context by someone with no background in the industry, Dad said dismissively. Any competent financial lawyer would explain them as standard practice. Is that why you fired the compliance officer who questioned them? And the accountant who refused to sign off on the quarterly reports? Were they just not competent enough to understand your genius? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Dad's face. You've been talking to disgruntled former employees, he recovered quickly. People who couldn't meet expectations and want to blame others for their failures. I've also spoken with the SEC's enforcement division, I said quietly. They found these documents quite enlightening. It was a bluff. I hadn't actually contacted regulators yet, but Dad couldn't know that. His composure cracked slightly. You'd destroy this family over some misguided principle. Andrew leaned forward. Dana, please. Think about what you're doing. There are children involved. My kids, Scott's kids. Their futures depend on this company and our family's reputation. I am thinking about their futures, I replied. What kind of legacy are we leaving them? If it's built on fraud, what happens to them when this all collapses anyway? And they learn their security was built on stealing from others. Nobody was stolen from Dad, insisted voice rising. Every client will get exactly what they were promised. I just needed time to turn these investments around. You've been saying that for years, I countered. Meanwhile, the hole keeps getting deeper. How many millions are missing now? 10, 20. Scott stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're not qualified to judge these matters. You're a nurse, for God's sake. Yes, I am, I said, standing to face him. I spent years learning to assess situations, identify problems, and implement solutions to help people heal. That's exactly what the company needs now. What it needs is for you to stay in your lane, Dad said coldly. Take the settlement. It's more than fair. It's not about money, I told him. It's about Grandpa's legacy. It's about doing what's right for the people who trusted this firm with their life savings. Don't you dare invoke Walter's name, Dad snapped, truly angry now. You knew him for what? The last 2 years of his life. I worked alongside him for 40 years. I built this company while you were playing house with dolls. You dismantled everything he valued, I shot back. He watched you turn his life's work into a scheme to enrich yourself at others' expense. He was a relic, Dad shouted, losing control. Stuck in the past, with his quaint ideas about fiduciary responsibility and modest returns. This is a different world. You adapt, or you die. Is that what you told yourself when you started falsifying returns? When you diverted client funds to cover your personal trading losses? Was that just adapting? Dad advanced toward me, face contorted with rage. You, ungrateful, self-righteous little. Mr. Harrington stepped between us. That's enough, Richard. Stay out of this, George. This is family business. It became my business when Walter asked me to protect his true legacy, Mr. Harrington replied evenly. And when you began committing fraud, you have no proof of anything, Dad insisted. We have everything we need, I said quietly. The real question is what happens next. There are 2 paths forward. One involves full disclosure to authorities, likely criminal charges, and the end of Patterson Financial. The other, Andrew prompted when I paused. The other requires Dad to step down immediately and cooperate with a full restructuring. All misappropriated funds must be returned. All deceptive practices ended. The company would continue under new leadership with an ethics committee and external oversight. You can't possibly think you can run this company, Dad scoffed. Not alone, no. But Grandpa assembled an advisory team of his most trusted colleagues to guide the transition. People who understand both finance and ethics. Dad laughed bitterly. So I'm supposed to just surrender everything I've built and slink away in disgrace while you play executive with Walter's retirement friends. You'd avoid prison, I pointed out. And the company, Grandpa's company, would survive. This is extortion. No, Dad. This is the consequence of your choices. The confrontation escalated as Dad alternated between threats, dismissals, and attempts to drive wedges between me and my brothers. Through it all, I remained calmer than I'd ever been in his presence, which seemed to infuriate him further. Finally, he made his fatal mistake. None of this would stand up in court, he declared. Walter's signature on those final company directives was obtained when he was clearly incompetent. I had to sign half his documents myself those last months, just to keep things running. The room fell silent. Even my brothers looked shocked. You forged Grandpa's signature, I asked. Dad realized his error immediately. I didn't say that. I meant I had his power of attorney for routine matters. No, you didn't, Mr. Harrington said, stepping forward. Walter explicitly revoked any powers of attorney for Richard Patterson 6 months before his death. I have the notarized documents. That's not. Dad began, but his bluster was fading. You just admitted to forgery, Mr. Harrington continued, which validates our concerns about the authenticity of numerous financial documents. The sound of a closing door made us all turn. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor Chambers, who had quietly entered during the confrontation. I recorded everything she said, holding up her phone, including the admission to forgery, which opens the door to examining every document Richard has touched in the past several years. Dad collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 64 years. You set me up. No, Dad, I said softly. You did this to yourself. My brothers were staring at our father with new eyes, seeing for the first time the man beneath the powerful facade. How bad is it really? Scott asked, addressing me directly for the first time. Bad enough that we need to act immediately to have any hope of saving the company and making clients whole. And if we cooperate? Andrew asked. Then we focus on rebuilding rather than prosecution, I replied. But it starts with Dad stepping down. Today, the fight had gone out of my father. He sat silently as we outlined the immediate steps needed: freezing the offshore accounts, halting all asset sales, and implementing financial controls to prevent further damage. As the meeting concluded, Dad finally spoke. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're taking on. This company will destroy you just like it destroyed me. I looked at him with genuine sadness. It didn't destroy you, Dad. Your choices did. As he left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no triumph, only the weight of the enormous task ahead, and the tragedy of a man who had lost his way so completely that he couldn't recognize what truly mattered. The months following that confrontation were the most challenging of my life. Taking control of Patterson Financial meant not only learning an entirely new industry, but also dealing with the aftermath of years of mismanagement and deception. The first order of business was complete transparency. With Mr. Harrington's guidance and Eleanor's expertise, we conducted a thorough audit of every account and investment. The results were sobering. Nearly $8 million had been misappropriated or lost through Dad's high-risk ventures. We have 2 options, Eleanor explained during an emergency board meeting where I'd replaced Dad with Grandpa's trusted advisors. We can report everything to regulatory authorities, which would likely mean criminal charges and the end of the firm, or we can implement an aggressive recovery plan. The board unanimously chose recovery. It meant liquidating most of Grandpa's personal assets, the vacation home, his art collection, investment properties, and establishing a restitution fund for affected clients. It also meant complete restructuring of the company's operations and culture. Dad, faced with the evidence Eleanor had compiled, agreed to cooperate in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. He signed over his remaining assets and officially retired, moving to a modest condo in Florida. Our relationship remained strained, but the open hostility had given way to an uneasy truce. My brothers were a different story. After the initial shock wore off, They were faced with the 5-year trust provision in Grandpa's will, requiring them to work outside the family business. "What am I supposed to do?" Scott demanded. "I've been at Patterson Financial my entire career." "Exactly what Grandpa wanted," I explained. "Gain perspective by working somewhere your last name doesn't automatically open doors." Andrew surprisingly adapted first. With his finance background, he found a position with a community development fund providing loans to small businesses in underserved neighborhoods. "It's different," he admitted when we met for coffee 3 months later. "The money's nothing like what I made before, but there's something rewarding about helping people who actually need it." Scott took longer cycling through anger and resentment before eventually accepting a position with a financial literacy program teaching basic money management in public schools. As for me, I assembled a management team that combined financial expertise with ethical commitment. George Fleming came out of retirement to serve as interim CEO, while I learned the business from the ground up. Thomas Miller, the former compliance officer, returned to establish rigorous ethical guidelines and monitoring systems. I didn't abandon nursing entirely. Instead, I found unexpected parallels between healthcare and financial services. Both required technical knowledge systems, thinking, and genuine care for people's well-being. 6 months after taking control, I established the Walter Patterson Foundation, dedicated to financial education and support for elderly clients. The Foundation's first initiative was a program connecting nursing students with seniors who needed help, managing medical bills and insurance, combining my two worlds in a way that would have made Grandpa proud. The company slowly regained its footing. We lost some clients when the restructuring was announced, but retained most by being honest about past mistakes and our commitment to making things right. Within a year, we began attracting new clients drawn to our emphasis on ethical investing and personalized service. On the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I organized a memorial service at his favorite spot in Shenley Park, where he had often taken me for walks during my caregiving years. To my surprise, nearly 200 people attended, clients, employees, past and present community members touched by his generosity. Dad came too, standing awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. He looked older, diminished somehow, without the trappings of power he'd hidden behind for so long. When he approached me after the service, I tensed instinctively. "Walter would have been proud," he said, simply gesturing to the assembled crowd. "You understood something about him that I never did." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd ever expected from him. "He always hoped you'd remember what the business was really about," I replied. "People, not just profits." Dad nodded slowly. "I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Everything became a competition, a game to win at any cost." "It's not too late to change that perspective," I suggested carefully. "Maybe not." He hesitated, then added, "I've been volunteering at a debt counseling center in Florida. Just basic stuff, helping people organize their finances. It's different." It was a small step, but a genuine one. For the first time in my adult life, I saw a glimmer of the father Grandpa had always insisted still existed beneath the ruthless businessman. In the year that followed, Patterson Financial, renamed Patterson Advisory Services to reflect our new mission, regained its reputation as one of Pittsburgh's most client-focused firms. Our returns were more modest than during Dad's high-risk years, but our clients slept better knowing their money was being managed with integrity and care. Andrew and Scott eventually returned to the company after completing their required time away. Both were changed men, bringing new perspectives and ideas that actually aligned with Grandpa's original vision. Our family relationships remained complicated, but we found a new professional respect for each other's strengths. As for me, I discovered that my throne looked nothing like Dad's corner office with its power desk and intimidating views. My leadership style was collaborative and empathetic, drawing on my nursing experience to build a culture of care extending to employees and clients alike. I took the throne silently without the domineering tactics my father had employed, proving that compassionate leadership could be more effective than intimidation. Grandpa's words often echoed in my mind during difficult decisions. "True wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in how you treat people when it costs you something." By that measure, despite the financial setbacks of the restructuring, Patterson Advisory Services was wealthier than it had ever been under my father's leadership. We measured success differently now by client satisfaction, employee well-being, and positive community impact, alongside responsible returns. 3 years after that fateful funeral where my father had whispered, "You get nothing, just like you deserve," I stood at the podium during our annual client appreciation event, looking out at the faces of people whose financial security we protected. My grandfather believed that managing someone's financial future was a sacred trust, I told them. It means promising to value their dreams as much as your own profit. It means remembering that behind every account number is a human story, a child's education, a comfortable retirement, a legacy for the next generation. At Patterson Advisory, we make that promise every day to every client. Later, as I placed fresh flowers on Grandpa's grave, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before his illness. The company was healthy again. The family was healing, and I had found my calling in a place I never expected. "Thank you for believing in me," I whispered. "I hope I've made you proud." Have you ever had to stand up for what's right, even when it meant confronting your own family? What gave you the strength to do it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share with anyone who might need a reminder that integrity matters more than money. Thank you for listening, and remember, true wealth isn't measured by what you have, but by who you become when facing life's most difficult choices.